Yeah, I guess this kind of brings us back to this issue of law, you being a lawyer, which I just learned from an Australian lawyer who happened to be in Oxford a couple months ago, that the difference between a barrister and a solicitor, which we don't make the distinction in the United States.
Oh, right. Yep.
Yeah, you're just a lawyer, right? And that a barrister is somebody who stands at the bar and gets examined so that they can, so they can stand in court. If I have this correct, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You can litigate or argue in court if you're a barrister versus a solicitor, which is why this is the part that blew my mind, is why it's called the bar exam in the United States.
Yeah.
Because you would stand at the bar in court traditionally.
Yeah. They're the really expensive ones.
Yeah, yeah. So this book that I wrote called Understanding Biblical Law. So this was my task. I realized that, like, I don't know, maybe 30% of that task was helping people to understand the genre of law, and that basically everything you know about law in the modern world is not what's going on in biblical law. It's not what's going on in ancient Near Eastern law, and then biblical law is a very unique flavor of ancient Near Eastern law. And so one of the issues I ran into, and it's very difficult, like in a book or even in person, when you explain to people, I'm looking for new ways to do it, where you say, like, well, look, there's no like breaking and keeping the law in the Hebrew Torah, like that. Those metaphors don't work. And then someone will say, well, but it says you must keep the law of the Lord your God. And I'm like, yeah, but keep there means tend or cultivate. It's shamar. It's to foster and cultivate something. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, this is the issue, is we're reading the Old Testament law, we're projecting modern legal frameworks onto the Old Testament law, and then we get upset with the Old Testament law when it doesn't seem to meet, we throw the boomerang, it goes into the void, and then we're mad because it doesn't come back to us with anything useful. Am I hearing you correct?
Yeah, totally. We just think, or we think these people are stupid.
Right, or brutish or barbaric, or yeah.
Yeah, like their laws are stupid. Or, I mean, maybe another subtle version of that is we find loopholes. It's like, aha, wow, it says if your ox scores someone, but it was my dog.
Right.
Yeah, and the way Western law works, like you can make a whole career, and I almost did, out of finding loopholes.
Right.
But you can't find loopholes in Torah. Like that's just not. It's a category error. It's not how it works.
That's a good way to put it. Oh, I wish I had that in my book.
Sure. Well, I got all my ideas about law I've stolen from you, so feel free to take it full circle.
You can't find loophole. That's a great hook. Thank you for that. That's a gift.
Well, because it would work. I mean, an imaginative exercise, which you do really in your book, where you sort of play out this narrative alongside the law, which I think is a brilliant move, by the way. So this is spoilers, so I know this book isn't out yet, but
yeah, go ahead. I mean, nobody's going. This is all anybody's ever going to see of this book. So
no, I talk about it a lot because I think that's really helpful, right? Because I've asked this year, I asked my students, well, how do you imagine that Torah is used? These because typically how we teach the genre of law is you've got the apodictic law, you've got the casuistic law. It's like these two types. Here's how they work grammatically, and next lesson we move on. But hang on, just when are they using these laws? How is it being used? Are you imagining like a courtroom and there's like some judge up the front and the lawyer's like, aha, but actually, and Western law you can do that way. Like my favorite legal case ever, I never practiced as a lawyer, but I did the law degree before going into ministry. My favorite law case ever was these mafia guys who killed someone, whatever the reason. Anyway, they shot him, rolled him in a carpet, and threw him off a cliff. Threw his body off the cliff. But the problem was, actually, the autopsy revealed that he didn't die from the gunshot wound. Right. He drowned. And under Western law, you have to have both what's called the actus reus, which is the kind of the actual action of killing someone. But to be guilty of murder, you have to have the intention to kill. And their lawyer said, well, actually, they attempted to murder him, but he didn't die from the gunshot wound. And they said, well, hang on, but you threw him off a cliff and he drowned. Yeah, but they thought that was a body. That was manslaughter. That was accidental death. Right? And that kind of like that whole bizarre like legal reasoning process is a reflection of how we think law works, which is more like computer code than like literature.
Right.
you kind of have to, legal drafters make a profession out of making sure that every logical case is kind of covered here. Whereas, as you rightly put in the book, like is it? I think this is your phrase. Like you keep the law the way you keep a garden. You cultivate it. That's the I think I've used that a lot because it's a really helpful image. You kind of do not covet. Like, how on earth would you prosecute that commandment? Like I feel like Drew's been coveting my bookshelf, Your Honor, and here's the evidence. So what's even the punishment for that? Like,
Right.
it's not stated. The evidentiary procedures are not clear. And what if you covet something that's not on that list? Like bookshelves is not on the list. You didn't covet my ox, so you're off the hook. Like that whole way that we approach law, I'm convinced makes no sense when you look at biblical law. So I think I still don't know what the social function is of these texts, and maybe you can help me with that. Because one thing genre theory helps us see is that the real question we need to answer with any genre is, what is it for? Not just how is it written, but what is it for? So why do people write these texts? What are they trying to achieve? Why do they reach for this form and not another form in order to get things done? And maybe you can tell me, what is law for? What is a Torah for?
Hey there, if you've benefited from this content at all, please hit the like and subscribe, or subscribe and like, one of those or both of them together on this video. It helps us tremendously with the math algorithm nerd monsters. That is a great question, and I think I had the same struggle when I was working on ritual, because I wasn't working on the actual rituals, or you kind of blend all of it together, but really you're working on text about ritual, which don't have enough instruction in them to actually perform the ritual. So like you can't perform a single ritual from the Torah just according to the text. You have to have some prior ritual knowledge and have some traditions built up by the time you get the text. And one thing that I could say that I feel fairly confident about is, according to the Torah, I think the inner logic is this is to be read out loud to everybody: men, women, children, foreigners, native born. Sorry, this is my interpretation. I said it really confidently at first. Let me back off that a little bit. What I see as what's going on here.
Go hard. I don't care. Go hard.
Is if you think about those few little periods when Israel seems to be doing what God wants them to do in general, like they have the tabernacle, they're bringing sacrifices to Him. They haven't flubbed it completely at that point. There's a lot of stuff that, like if you were just participating as an Israelite, you bring your lamb, or your flour to the gate, and you don't know what happens inside the tent or inside the inside of the tent, or you don't know if it's a big scam, a big Ponzi scheme, or whatever. And if the elders in your village make a decision about something that somebody did wrongly, like you don't know whether that's just or wise or loving. I mean, to some extent, you would think you would like to know, but so that fact of having it read, that you have textualized ritual and textualized law that is not actually received textually, it's received orally through your ear, through listening, means that you can now hold the priest accountable, right? You can say, and you see this in Samuel, right? They say, we don't want, Eli, we don't want your sons because they're no good. And Samuel as well, we don't want your sons. Because we know what God, it seems to indicate to me that they know what actually God requires of them according to the Torah, and that these men are not doing it. So that social function is, to me, a very egalitarian spread of accountability. And it goes in both ways. It also means, therefore, everybody who has heard the law is responsible to keep it. So nobody can say, I didn't know, right? And it's part of I'll end my soapbox diatribe here, but it's actually part of why I think biblical literacy and fluency is so important, is because leaders, when left to their own devices, can go really sideways and find all kinds of spiritualized reasons to hide it, and hide it with expertise, or being like, I'm the only one who understands what the text says, or I'm the only one who understands how to lead a church. So it's the church's responsibility, from even the children in the church, to say like, hey, we're not living up to this, or you're not living up to this, right? So that would be my off the cuff answer.
That's a very good answer. It would suggest that the stories, like the narratives, might have the same function as well. And often they do. Like it's more memorable to say, hey, you guys seem to be playing fast and loose with that kind of strange fire you're offering.
Right.
Who knows what that is? Maybe some, kind of interesting herbs they're burning. Well, do you remember Nadab? Well, I mean that seems to be the same function. Which, interestingly, the law, narrative, and wisdom then become very kind of fluid. I
Yes,
mean, I would say part of the
intertwined. Yeah.
same genre ecosystem, if not
Yes.
kind of complementary genres. I think that the light bulb moment for me teaching Old Testament law was to realize that this is not the rule book or the kind of the plans for a perfect society, which is I think
Right.
often how I grew
Right.
up hearing. Here we have the model of a perfect society, which they never did. But if only we followed all these laws but then like I think then because our next job as Christians, at least I believe as Christians, is then to take the law seriously and to keep the law. But it's sort of we have to then do some pretty interesting hermeneutical moves to deal with our misunderstanding of what the law is in order then to apply it as Christians. So one of the funny full circles that I've come is like I was really persuaded by my colleague Brian Rosner's idea that Paul kind of takes Old Testament law and rejects it as law, but rebirths it as wisdom, which I think is right and true and exegetically what Paul is doing. But I was like, hang on, I think it was wisdom at the start.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
that's kind of it actually doing that. He didn't reimagine it anything different to what it originally was meant to function. That's not to underplay the contribution of St. Paul, but it's not that different to actually how probably Old Testament believers were using this stuff. And I think that there's a crisis of confidence in handling Old Testament law, which I think that's why I was really grateful for the conversation and then your book, because I just feel like we need to give people better than this, or we just end up looking really dumb. Like and the classic kind of we have a group of comedians in this country who used to kind of do like kind of go up and accost public figures and like do stunts, right? And one of the ones they did is they found the Archbishop of Sydney and basically threw Leviticus at him. You've just come out of the sanctuary of the Lord, but you have
Right.
glasses. How do you justify being, blind? Like it was just, it's national TV. It's like it was pretty funny. But to your point about biblical literacy, knowing how to respond to that is so much harder if you don't have a sense of what biblical law was always meant to do. So yeah, I'm grateful for your work there, Drew.
I'm glad any of it landed, quite honestly. Yeah, I think to extend that, or maybe just to reiterate what you're saying, when you get to Jesus's interpretation of the law, it is the same thing. He's just basically saying, hey, this was always wisdom. Because at this point, quite honestly, the Pharisees, God love them for all the good things about the Pharisees we could say, there was this Romanizing and legalist structure that has now been kind of superimposed in some aspects of their legal thinking, which Jesus commends some of that extension of the wisdom. Oh, okay, you thought about the mint, dill, and cumin. Like, yeah, okay, that's a wise extension of the tithing tax. Nothing wrong with that. But you can't do that and ignore the other wisdom part, right? And nothing new in the Sermon on the Mount. I think there are some very clever, underhanded moves by Jesus to show how much he really does understand the wisdom of the law, but nothing that in any way, as he says, takes one iota away from it. So we actually get to understand the New Testament better by understanding the genre of law in the Hebrew Bible. One, just to throw a technical issue at you to see if you can help me think through it. It seems to me that Paul also uses the word nomos, law, to refer to several different things, right? Sometimes he's referring to a tradition of understanding that is not good, and then sometimes he's referring to law. But that's, when you get down to that kind of use of a word, you're not talking about genre anymore. So what would you consider that? Discerning
Yeah.
which sense of law he means in which context.
Yeah, so easy. I mean, it is very tricky to define or even isolate law as a genre versus law as a concept.
Right.
Um, so, and this, I mean, one of my least favorite things about genre studies is debate about terminology.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of a non-combatant in this in this space. So if you like, I think there is a genre of law, but if you'd prefer to say that there's a concept of law and then there's the genre of case law or a genre of commandment, say. I mean, I'm not going to fight you for that. And I can see why you would want to distinguish it. But yeah, I think these things are tricky because even when we do have explicit labels in the kind of text for the genre, like even when we do have a name for a thing, that name can be used in different ways. I mean, wisdom being like a classic example, like, or proverb, like what is a mashal? Like it seems to be
Right.
5 things.
Right.
And how does that relate to the overall genre of wisdom? And you mentioned at the start the kind of like, should we even talk about the genre of wisdom? Which is that kind of terminological debate. I keep my baseline on that is use whatever terminology you want. Just does it help? Like,
Right. Does it help?
Yeah. Is it actually helping you? And maybe that's my literary theory background. Like I noticed that in the linguistics cage fights, it seems that it's like a fight to the death over terminology. And if you use the wrong terminology, then like they will gouge your eyes out on the floor of an SPL seminar. I don't think that's not how I use terminology. For me, they're tools that you either build yourself or borrow. And if they're useful, if calling law a genre is useful for you, then do it.
Right.
So I'll you do you, mate. You do you.
Yeah.
That's
Why are the philological arguments so vicious? Because the stakes are so.
sure. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Andy Judd, if you wonder what book we keep referring to a book, I have this book,
The book, yeah.
Modern Genre Theory. It's with Zondervan. A fantastic book. It's also very funny. The footnotes, I don't think I've ever laughed at footnotes as much as I laughed at yours. You were talking about, well, I won't spoil it, but there is a recipe for scones in a footnote. A very well placed recipe for scones, which I might just start doing that. Put random recipes in my footnotes.
Yeah, do it.
See if
Do
anybody's
it.
looking down. It's a very fun book, very easy to read, and it will have you thinking anew about the topic in 15 different ways. So thank you, Andy, for helping us think through the issue of genre.
Thanks, Drew. It's been Jean.
Genre.
Thanks, Drew. It's been great.